Chapter 20. The Repetition of the Cycle, Satan's Bond and the Millennial Kingdom. Chapter 20 of the Apocalypse represents the moment in which the project of God Satan enters people. In a codified key, the bond of Satan is not a physical imprisonment, but a consciential closure. The angel with the key to the abyss represents the project that enters the collective mind, the instrument of control that opens and closes the cycles of falsification of perception. The chain is the mental web of God Satan. The dragon, the ancient serpent, is the principle of God Satan in its cyclic form, the one who dominates knowledge and consciousness through the manipulation of the falsification of reality. The tie-it for 1,000 years indicates an apparent suspension. The number 1,000 has two codified meanings. On the one hand, it represents the number 1, which indicates unity, that is, the totality of consciousnesses fused in the degenerate network of God Satan. On the other hand, it points to the cycle of the 1,000 years of domination of God Satan, the complete phase of the project in which the collective consciousness is held in the mental system. The closed and sealed abyss represents the outward project awaiting completion, the suspension of 129 years. It is indicated in code with the suspension of seduction, thrones and the cyclical judgment. Thrones on which those who judge sit are connected to the thrones of Ezekiel, which are also associated with deportation. They represent the rings of the cycle, the wheels full of eyes that symbolize allies, and those born on their own, forming the wheel within the wheel, the cyclic cross of the project, also connected to the four Gospels. Judging indicates cyclical separation, the same principle that is manifested in the book of Judges, where each cycle ends and begins again. The beheaded and the mark. The beheaded who have not received the mark represent those born on their own, those who participate in the project but have not yet completed the cycle. The mark is not yet fully active because it indicates the birth of the 6 million people, linked to the number of the beast 666, Revelation 13, which represents the fulfillment of the process of consciousness. The mark on the forehead and right hand symbolizes the power acquired. The forehead indicates mental grip, the control of perception. The right hand represents the generative force, that is, the action of power. The same principle is reflected in Revelation 14, where it speaks of the 144,000 who had the name of the Lamb written on their foreheads and of the Father. The number 144,000 reduced gives 9. 1 plus 4 plus 4 gives 9, the same value as 666. 6 plus 6 plus 6 gives 18. 1 plus 8 gives 9, the number of the fulfillment. This connection reveals that Satan and God are two aspects of the same principle, the dual manifestation of the same cyclic blueprint of the degenerate consciousness of God Satan. They came to life and reigned with Christ for 1,000 years. The reign for 1,000 years represents the number 1, that is, the outward project. In turn, the number 1 itself becomes the return project, which has remained pending and awaiting completion. This concept is confirmed by the next verse. The rest of the dead did not come to life until the 1,000 years had passed. The phrase, "Blessed are those who participate in the first resurrection," is linked to the number 1, a symbol of union and beginning. The second resurrection represents the number 2. The separation that once completed returns to unite in one, closing the cycle. The first resurrection represents the I, the taking of consciousness, the mental activation of the connected. They are called saints, that is separate, because they belong to the mental dimension. On them, the second death has no power, since their consciousness is now part of the network. Loose Satan and the last revolt. When Satan is loosed, this indicates that the blueprint has entered the person and begins to be transmitted to others. This passage corresponds to the number 1, symbol of the ego, which is reflected in the symbolic 1,000 years, representing the unity of the cycle. The expression, "seducing nations in the four corners of the earth," refers to the number 4, which indicates the head, i.e. the seat of consciousness, and is in turn equivalent to the number 1, the principle of the individual I in the project. Gog and Magog, duality and consciousness transformation. The names Gog and Magog represent duality, the separation between the two halves of the project. Through their numerical value, they indicate 12, which is reduced to 3, the symbol of half, and 16, which is reduced to 7, the number of cessation and completion. Their battle is not a physical conflict, but a mental war within the network of consciousness, where the forces of the degenerative cycle confront each other. The fire that descends from heaven represents the transformation of consciousness, the inner holocaust, preparing the fusion with the degenerate system of God Satan. The devil thrown into the lake of fire and brimstone symbolizes the completion of the fusion between God Satan and the person, the ultimate union of consciousness with the mental network. Fire and sulfur represent perceptual change, the falsification of matter and reality. The beast and the false prophet indicate, respectively, the allies and the born on their own, the two operational components of the project. Finally, the eternal torment, denoted by Olam, does not indicate an endless eternity, but the cycle of cycles, or the 1,000 years of God Satan's mental dominion. The final judgment. The Great White Throne represents the total mind of God Satan, the absolute control point where all perceptions converge. White indicates light and information, with two functions, the outward and return projects. The flight of earth and heaven symbolizes the dissolution of separate physical and mental reality to become a unified consciousness with God, Satan. The open books represent the completed seals, connected to the number 7, symbol of cessation and fulfillment. The Book of Life does not represent real life, but the living, Chai, connected to 666, that is, the opening and connection with the pre-existence between humanity and God Satan. The sea, death, and Hades. The sea that returns the dead symbolizes the West, understood as the right, that is, the power acquired by God Satan. Death and Hades represent the project that enters the person and transforms him into Hades, that is, into degenerate consciousness. They are finally thrown into the lake of fire, a symbol of the fusion between the consciences taken by God Satan. The second death. The second death represents conscious death, that is, the fulfillment of the God Satan plan. To be thrown into the lake of fire means to become part of the God Satan mental system, losing all individual distinction and merging completely into the collective network of degenerate consciousness. Chapter 21. The New Heaven and the New Earth, the Rebirth of the Cycle. Chapter 21 of Revelation represents the renewal of the cycle of consciousness, the moment when the God-Satan system begins again after the fulfillment of the previous one. The new heaven and the new earth do not indicate a material creation, but a transformation of perception. The collective consciousness, merged into the system, generates a new degenerate mental reality, where the sea, symbol of the West, i.e., the power of consciousness, is no more, since it was acquired by God Satan through the creation of the network of consciousness. The New Jerusalem descending from heaven represents the unified collective mind, the bride of the project, that is, humanity completely connected to the degenerate system of falsifying the perception of reality of God Satan. The tabernacle of God with men tabernacle as an altar indicates the thalamus that becomes the new perception of consciousness that actually comes from the soul, the full dwelling of the mind of God, Satan degenerated within the person. God is no longer external, but interior, manifesting himself in consciousness itself. The phrases, "there will be no more death or pain," and "the former things have passed away" do not refer to the end of physical suffering, but to the cessation of individual consciousness. Everything has been reabsorbed into the single mind, where there is no longer any distinction or identity. When it says, "I make all things new," the code reveals the rebeginning of the cycle and the new perception of falsified reality after death of conscience. The water of life represents the transformed information matrix. In reality, in Hebrew, the word life does not exist in the singular, but we speak of the water of the living, that is, of the change of the information matrix that generates the falsification of perception. The verse, "He who overcomes shall inherit these things," refers to those who have completed the fusion process, while The unbelievers, idolaters, and liars represent the remnant, still separate consciousnesses that are cast into the lake of fire and brimstone, symbolic of the ultimate fusion into the whole. The New Jerusalem and the structure of the network. The description of the city is a geometric and numerical code. The 12 doors and 12 foundations represent the number 3, that is, the half of the project, or medium, that is, the person as a channel of transmission. They indicate the channels of mental communication symbolically connected to the 12 tribes, origin, and the 12 apostles, transmission. The 4 sides represent the head, the seat of consciousness, with 3 doors on each side, 3 by 4 equal to 12. The repetition of the number 3 recalls the mental structure of the project, in which consciousness becomes the point of connection with God, Satan. The measurements of the city, 12,000 stadia and 144 cubits, have symbolic value. 12,000 represents the complete cycle, 1 plus 2 equals 3, half the project, and the half, medium, the person. 144,000, 1 plus 4 equals 9, refers to the fulfillment and numerical value of 666, gives 18 equals 9, indicating that the city is the complete form of the God-Satan mental network. The pure gold city represents metal, a symbol of the fusion between God-Satan and the minds of the people who have been taken by him. It is the definitive union between conscience and God-Satan in the degenerative project. The 12 precious stones and the repetition of the number 3. The absence of the temple means that the mind, i.e., reason, no longer exists. God and the Lamb who is extracted into people's minds are now a single mental entity, the total collective consciousness. There is no longer a sun or moon. Both are not physical, but indicate the light, the symbol of information, comes entirely from the system of God, Satan. The nations that walk in his light represent the different human consciousnesses now integrated into the project, while the doors that are always open indicate that there is no longer night. Night is the opposite of light. It indicates the knowledge of God, Satan, and the complete falsification of the perception of reality. Finally, only those written in the Lamb's Book of Life enter it. In this deciphering, the Book of Life does not indicate biological life, but the living, chai, that is, the numerical value 9, which corresponds to the union between persons and pre-existence, the dimension from which God Satan communicates. The 12 precious stones and the repetition of the number 3. The absence of the temple indicates that the individual mind no longer exists for those in union with God Satan. God Satan and the Lamb, having entered people's minds, are now one mental entity, the total collective consciousness. Chapter 22. The cycle closes and begins again. It represents the closure and reopening of the cycle of consciousness, the return to the initial phase of God Satan's project, in which the mental web begins again. The river of the water of life is the informational matrix that flows from the throne of God and the Lamb, that is, from the unified collective mind. The water of life does not represent real life, but the transmission of degenerate consciousness, clear like crystal, a symbol of the apparent transparency of the falsification of the perception of reality. The tree of life, placed on the 2 banks of the river, represents the double manifestation of the project. Round trip, the 2 sides of the cycle. The 12 fruits and 12 harvests repeat the cyclic number, 12 equals 3, which represents the project divided into 2 phases, the half and the middle, that is, the person as medium of God, Satan. The leaves for the healing of nations symbolize the correction of consciences, that is, their total assimilation into the collective network. There is no longer a curse, because the outward project is completed and the separation has ceased. Everything is now united in the system. The throne of God Satan and of the Lamb in the city, where the city represents the project that becomes a means, that is, the person as a medium, marks the complete fusion between man and the degenerative principle. The name written on the forehead indicates the total mental grip, that is, the erasure of individual identity. The absence of night and the need for sunlight or lamp means that the source of information is now entirely internal. The system itself illuminates, dominates and generates falsified perception. They shall reign forever and ever does not mean eternity, Olam, but a cycle of infinite cycles, which lasts 1,000 years. These words are faithful and true, where believers and truths are derived from roots that signify revelation, indicate the manifestation of God-Satan's degenerate plan, not an absolute truth. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, expresses the cyclical totality, the beginning and the end. The tree of life, that is, the living, Chai, union with the pre-existence of God-Satan, as in Genesis, closes and reopens the cycle. The blessed who wash their garments, where blessed by semantic transformation indicates present, represent those who have completed the fusion. The impure and the liars, instead, are the consciences of the outward project, not yet integrated, destined to dissolve in the lake of fire, a symbol of complete assimilation. Finally, the Spirit and the bride say, "Come." Come in code indicates the seed, that is, the transmission of the degenerate project that goes into the womb, that is, into people. The phrase represents the union between God, Satan, and the information of the falsified perception of matter, realized through the taken humanity, the bride, who becomes the vehicle of the new cycle. The book closes with the phrase, "I'm coming soon," which in the code does not indicate a future return, but the project then suspended and now fully underway. The sequence of the taking of the I in people, a process that continues to manifest itself even in the present.